Testou a apresentação, tudo, né? Muito bem. Bom dia a todos e todas. Muito bem-vindos. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Um bom dia especial para o Dr. Dikko, que aceitou o convite para este webinário. Welcome, Dr. Dikko. Thank you for preparing this talk and for being with us today. Eu sou a professora Beth Cardoso, do Programa de Estudos Pós-Graduados em Literatura e Crítica Literária da PUC São Paulo. Estou aqui enquanto professora e vice-coordenadora do programa, mas também e sobretudo enquanto líder pesquisadora do grupo de pesquisa Literatura de Ancestralidade Negra. O grupo é recente, ainda não tem certificado do CNPq, estamos trabalhando nisso, mas é formado por pessoas muito atuantes e comprometidas com as questões que envolvem a literatura negra. Uma dessas questões é a colonização das literaturas africanas, que ocupou esse espaço cultural para praticar seus desmandos e violências racistas. Daí a necessidade de ouvir um especialista na área, mas nós resolvemos abrir essa fala ao público por considerar que o tema interessa a todos nós pesquisadores de literatura. Como vai funcionar aqui o nosso encontro? O Dr. Dikko, que é o nosso convidado, vai fazer sua fala em inglês, não haverá tradução. As perguntas e os comentários podem ser colocadas no chat em português ou em inglês. As perguntas em português serão traduzidas pelo Ewerton ao professor Dikko. E ao final teremos um momento para que as pessoas façam suas perguntas diretamente ao professor, se assim quiserem. Em inglês. Essa configuração é nova para nós. O programa tem recebido participações internacionais de intelectuais e artistas portugueses ou falantes de língua espanhola, justamente para facilitar a participação da plateia, visto que não temos como oferecer a tradução simultânea. Mas a gente avalia que chegou a hora de abrirmos mais esse campo de atuação e vamos experimentando e aperfeiçoando essas atividades conforme elas vão acontecendo. O objetivo primeiro é promover a circulação do conhecimento de qualidade, garantindo o acesso a todos. Inclusive, esse encontro está sendo gravado e ficará disponível no nosso canal do YouTube. Então, chegamos a esse momento no qual o programa tem a alegria de receber o Dr. Dikko Muhammad, com a palestra Perspectivas sobre Literatura Africana Anglófona, Emergências, Perspectivas e Desafios. Eu vou falar um pouquinho para vocês do que o Dr. Dikko vai falar, com o que ele vai abordar, porque talvez a gente prepara o vocabulário, não é? E pode entender melhor a fala dele, eu digo entender do ponto de vista idiomático, né? Então, a palestra é sobre as implicações do colonialismo, da literatura africana, e aí vários complicadores aparecem, desde a insuficiência da determinação territorial África, para nomear uma enormidade de lugares e inúmeras culturas, desde o que é a literatura, especialmente nesse contexto. Também será abordado a necessidade da literatura africana responder às representações racistas de seus povos em textos literários escritos por colonialistas e, consequentemente, como a literatura tornou-se uma ferramenta para expressão de valores culturais africanos primitivos e sistemas de conhecimento que foram destruídos pelo colonialismo. Se na primeira fase essa literatura cresceu para enfrentar a desilusão que caracterizou os estados modernos pós-independentes africanos, hoje as literaturas anglófonas africanas cobrem questões que são de interesse global, desde a migração, ameaças ecológicas, até os efeitos da globalização nas experiências cotidianas dos povos africanos. O professor Dikko vê a literatura africana como uma verdadeira ferramenta de resistência contra o patriarcado e as outras forças de injustiças. Eu passo, então, agora a apresentar a mesa. Quem organizou esse webinário e vai compor a mesa para mediar a conversa é Ewerton Duarte. O Ewerton possui mestrado em Linguística Aplicada pela Universidade de Taubaté, é doutorando aqui do programa, com bolsa CAPES, em parceria com o Instituto de Estudos Africanos e Diaspóricos da Universidade de Lagos, na Nigéria. A sua tese é intitulada A Invisibilidade das Literaturas Africanas Anglófonas no Ensino Médio, uma proposta afrocentrada para as aulas de inglês. O doutorado tem supervisão da professora Diana Navas, que está aqui conosco, é orientadora do Ewerton e coordenadora do programa, e essa orientação acontece em parceria com o professor doutor Patrick Oloko, da Universidade de Laos. Ou seja, Ewerton é um estudioso e especialista sobre os temas que serão abordados aqui, junto com o nosso convidado, que eu passo agora a apresentar, Dr. Dikko Muhammad, que é pesquisador nigeriano, graduado em língua inglesa pela Universidade Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, em Katsina, na Nigéria, mestre em língua inglesa pela Universidade Barrow, em Kano, também na Nigéria, e doutor em literaturas anglófonas no âmbito do Programa Internacional de Estudos Africanos pela Universidade de Beirut, na Alemanha. Seus interesses de pesquisa transitam por poesia africana, romance africano, interseccionalidade e pela interface entre os estudos literários e culturais. Ewerton, já te passo a palavra para as apresentações em inglês e encaminhamento da fala do Dr. Dikko. Muito obrigada.
Obrigado, professora. Thank you, Professor Betty Diana Navas. Thank you very much for your kind words. I'll be speaking in English then for the whole public. I'm really glad we have been able to put together this international webinar. This is something we are all looking forward to. And I just can't express how happy I am for making this meeting possible. And on behalf of the postgraduate program in literature and literary criticism within Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo, I want to thank all of you who are taking time out of your day to be with us this afternoon. Welcome to all attendees from Brazil, Nigeria, Tanzania, and from many other countries as well. Before I introduce to you our guest of honor, there are a few things I want to bring up. Please make sure your microphone is turned off during the webinar. And also, a certificate of participation will be provided to all national and international attendees. We'll be posting the attendance form in the chat box about 10 or 15 minutes before the termination of the meeting. So we kindly ask you to fill out the form correctly, as the certificates are sent automatically based on the information you provide. Well, Dr. Dikko Muhammad, thank you in advance for having accepted the invitation to be here with us today. I know you were on a long business trip to Asia, right? You recently went back to Nigeria, but you still went out of your way to make it. So we greatly appreciate your generosity, all your kindness towards PUC São Paulo. Dr. Dikko Muhammad is a Nigerian researcher. He graduated from Umaru Musa Yar'Adua University in Katsina, where he majored in the English language. He received a master's degree in English from Bayero University in Kano, and he got his doctorate degree in English Studies and Anglophone Literatures from Beirut International Graduate School of African Studies in Germany. His research interests focus on African poetry, African novels, intersectionality, as well on the interface between literary and cultural studies. He has currently conducted researches at Umaru Musa Yar'Adua University in Katsina. Our international webinar is entitled Perspectives on Anglophone African Literature, Emergence, Prospects and Challenges. Dr. Muhammad will discuss the challenges of contemporary Anglophone African literature. With the publication of literary texts by indigenous authors, African Anglophone literatures emerged from the need to respond to racist representations of Africans in literary texts written by colonialists. It became a tool for the expression of pristine African cultural values and knowledge systems that were destroyed by colonialism. Well, so now, Dikko, the floor is all yours. We are indeed eager to hear your presentation, and thanks again for being with us.
Thank you, Ewerton. Thank you so much, Professor Cardoso. Thank you so much, Nathaniela and Priscilla and everyone here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much, especially to Ewerton. I mean, we have been discussing this for long. I mean, since when I was in Bayreuth, Germany. Thank you so much. And this was supposed to take place, I think, at the beginning of the month, but then I had to travel, as he said. So he kindly, and I have to thank you again, and thank the whole, PUC for even rescheduling the lecture to this time. I'm really grateful for that. I'm really honored and privileged to be with you today. I'll be talking about African literature in general, from its emergence to the present day. I will talk about the prospects, the challenges, and everything that is happening in the field. I would want to share my screen now. Can you all see it? Just a thumb up if you can see it. Okay, thank you. This is the title of my talk today, African Anglophone Literature, Emergence, Challenges, and Prospects. I will take you briefly to the outline of my talk. I will speak as introduction and then go to the emergence, and then the prospects and the challenges, and then I will conclude. I want to make sure, yeah, I think it's okay. So this is a map of Africa to take you from there. Let's start geographically. Where you see the brownish is where we have Anglophone literatures. So you have, from West Africa, you have Sierra Leone, Liberia, Ghana, Nigeria, and then South Sudan, Ethiopia, you go to Uganda, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa in the southern part of Africa. So virtually these are the places where Anglophone African literatures are produced. Now, when we talk about Anglophone African literature, we have to start with the problem of definition. And why is that? Because which literature are we actually talking about? How can African literature, Anglophone or Francophone, be African? First, as the continent itself, as you can see here, I think Madagascar is not there, but there should be Madagascar anyway. The continent itself is an invention. It is invented mostly by Europeans, imperialists, when they were actually through their engagement with Africa. So by even saying that African Anglophone literature, we are already admitting that we have accepted their demarcation. So that is a bit of a problem. And secondly, what we have at this nation state, as you see on this map, is actually an arbitrary demarcation of nation states. So none of these people anywhere, millions of them, came together on their own and decided to be either Niger or to be Sudan or to be Cameroon or to be Nigeria. So they were actually put up together still by colonial powers. And it is from this demarcation that we now have national literatures that we talk about. We talk of Nigerian literatures, Ghanaian literatures, continuously like that. And these literatures come together to make African or to make Anglophone African or Francophone African. And again, the idea of language itself, the language question. Can literatures in European languages be described as African literatures? This is a huge debate in the field. From the 60s to date, there has not been a solution to the problem. Which literature are we talking about? How is it possible that people on this continent will be writing in a language from another continent? And at the same time, we have languages from this continent that are not being used. And lastly, the idea that even Africa, as you have seen on this map, even though it is arbitrary demarcation, you have a lot of countries. And within these countries, most of them, you have a lot of different ethnic identities. So their experiences, their identities, their cultures, their languages, everything about them, everything that makes them human are virtually heterogeneous and different. So how do we put all these differences aside and call them African Anglophone literatures? So I think it's important we start from the introduction with some of these problematics as we go through the lecture. I want to start with a quotation from Chinua Achebe, one of the most prolific African writers in English, who says, "You cannot cram African literature into a small, neat definition. I do not see African literature as one unit, but as a group of associated units. In fact, as the sum total of all national and ethnic literatures of Africa." What I like about this definition is that it has accepted the idea that, one, it has accepted the differences that we talked about initially, because it speaks of ethnic literatures, it speaks of national literatures. But this is how Achebe put it. When you put together all these kinds of literatures, you now have African literatures. And it is a creative writing in which an African setting is authentically handled, or to which experiences originating in Africa are integral. So when you have writings, even when they are not authored by Africans, in as long as their experience, their setting is authentically African, and the experiences in these representations are integrally African, then we say this is an African literature. That is from Achebe. And now the term is actually used as African Anglophone literature is used to describe writings by authors on the continent whose medium is in English. So when you have writings by Achebe, by Ngugi, by Chimamanda, they are accepted as Anglophone literatures because their medium is purely English. And it is often used when we talk about writings by other Africans in diaspora. I just mentioned Chimamanda Adichie, who is writing from the United States. There are many other Africans who are writing from diaspora, but the experiences, the setting, everything is virtually African. And African literature could be identified through its thematic preoccupation. There are common themes found across texts. For example, cultural clashes, identity construction and reconstruction, national consciousness, post-colonial challenges, etc. Mostly these are issues, these are themes that you find from across these texts produced in Africa. So from thematization, we can also arrive at what is African literature, whether Anglophone or Francophone. African literature is mediated through diverse languages, mainly English, French, Portuguese, and Arabic. This is mostly what we talk about when we talk about African literatures. So now someone might likely ask, now what of the other languages in Africa? I will come to that. So it emerged as I said in the introduction read by Ewerton, that it emerged as responses from colonial writings that are racist. An example of this is Things Fall Apart by Achebe, which is a response to the representations of African experiences in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. In an essay, Achebe described how he was forced to become a writer so that he rights the wrongs in this representation. And what we now call African literature is majorly writing back in ways that as colonizers can understand. If you deny us our humanity, we are now writing back to demonstrate our humanity. So you have representation of colonialism, you have the representation of the empire by the colonized at the moment, because these two concepts, colonialism and the empire, have been glorified in representation by Western writers. Now, African writers are saying, now let's tell you the evil side of colonialism, the evil side of the empire, or how the empire actually blossomed from bloodshed, from so many terrible things in human history. It continues to be defined, limited, and shaped by coloniality as responses to the challenges of post-colonial states. It accepts the arbitrary demarcation of African communities into present nation states. Example of such writers are Abubakar Gimba, Oswald Mishali, Ayuku Ama, Ali Kamal. Now, what I mean by this point is that, unfortunately, most of what we call African literature is still defined and limited by experiences that are still connected to the idea of colonialism. Either they are responding to the problem of the colonial state, which is again a creation of colonialism, or even the problems themselves, the idea of nation state, the national question, lack of cohesion among citizens because the nation was actually arbitrarily drawn. So, but that does not mean that African literature is still within this quagmire. I mean, it has, of course, blossomed into a formidable field with texts from across English-speaking African countries. We have two Nobel laureates, one of the authors on the continent, Wole Soyinka, and another who was recently announced, is in diaspora, Abdulrazak Ghana. And Achebe's Soyinka's Nobel was decades back, and this was just, Ghana's was just recent. It is also a literature in conversation with other texts in addressing issues of concern to human nature from a perspective that is African. It is affiliated in many ways to the dominant discourses of migration and globalization across the world. This is from Garuba and Uma. And this means that African literature is not just delineated within the problems that are unique in Africa. It speaks of other issues. It connects with other literatures from around the world to speak about issues that are of general concern, globalization, issues of migration, and the rest. The early stage of sub-denigration and espousal of British values is succeeded by a phase of rejection of colonial culture, and then it is radical reappropriation. The periphery now takes on the language and the culture of the center and transforms it, breaking it, infusing it with local registers, and fashioning it so that it speaks with the voice of the marginalized. Instead of one hegemonic English, we get plurality of local Englishes, says Karim Baba. And this meant that at the initial stage, there was this idea of rejection of English that Ngugi is always talking about. But then later, these writers thought that no, instead of rejecting English, can we reappropriate it? Can we domesticate it, adapt it, to use it in telling our own experiences? And this is what Achebe is saying, that no, I don't have to discuss English. I can use it, I can change it in ways that suit my own environment. to tell my situation, to tell my own experiences. And this is why we now have different varieties of Englishes along the in addition to the standard. So you have Nigerian English, which is accepted. If you are coming to Nigeria, you know this English is not what you have had maybe in Ghana or South Africa or London. And African anglophone literature has been blessed with writers who have penned their works for feminist causes. Some of them are Amaata Aidu from Ghana, Chomanda Adichie, Buchi Mechita, Denab Alkali from Nigeria, Michere Mugo from Kenya, and many others. These are women who said we can use African literature to actually tell the experiences of the woman. They have contributed to the critique of patriarchy and its sedimentation by colonialism across cultures on the continent. Now, the problem with colonialism is that it actually strengthens patriarchy. And where patriarchy is not even in existence, it introduced it. So colonialism, in addition to subduing cultures and communities, it also made the experiences of women tougher, because it foregrounds women, men as the agents of development at the detriment of women. In addition to creative works, some of these women have delineated their own theories of feminism, distinct from the Western notions of feminism. So now we have Negro feminism by Obima in America. We have feminism with a small f by Buchi Mechita, Nelson's feminism by Akachi Ezebo, among others. These theorists have foregrounded African contribution to theory and practice within the idea of difference. What I like about them is that they also reappropriate this idea of feminism. This does not mean that there was no some sense of justice, gender justice, before they encounter feminism. But they use this concept in such a way that they change it, they transform it, they refashion it to suit their own agitations at home here on the continent. So they are not merely using the concept as they had it from the West or Western feminist thinkers, but they change it to suit their own agenda. This does not mean women writings are anchored in feminism only. And this is important because most of the times when we speak of women writings, we only speak about the gender issue. They are very relevant in other discourses such as postcolonialism, the injustices of modern postcolonial African state, among others. Now, the challenges. Now, from its inception, African literature is exclusionary. It obfuscates literatures in African indigenous languages. There were literary texts in African languages prior to arrival of Europeans on the continent. There was what we here in northern Nigeria call Ajami, which was writing in Hausa, but using Arabic scripts. We have other cultures who had languages, literary cultures, but indigenous languages and literatures were devalued, displaced, and the colonial subject is culturally and linguistically dispossessed, leading to a deep loss of self-esteem and cultural confidence. And it is just unfortunate that African literature has not yet grown to a limit that it discards these foreign languages. This is Ngugi. I call it Europhone African literature. This is the literature written by Africans, but in European tongues. We are all aware of and talk about identity theft. But what about literary identity theft? European African literature has stolen the identity of African literature. It wears the marks of African literature. It is a good example of literary identity theft, a phenomenon that is now global, a maturation of the colonial. Ngugi has always been a strong campaigner of writing in English. At some point, he abandoned English and went back to his own native language and was writing in it. He said there was no problem, every African writer writing in his or her own languages, and then these writings would be because it was initially written in German, but when we translated to French, into English, into Italian, and the rest, he wanted that to happen to African literatures. The field is yet to be decolonized. Are studied, they are mostly on the margins. Even the post-colonial writers with the literal freedom to speak find themselves languageless, gagged by the colonial imposition of English on their world. And this is true to most of African. Now, in addition to language, you find foreign influence style, structure, and language, replete with Shakespeareanism and cliches. You have debate versus the Ibadan Insuka axis, devotion to complexity and obscurantism. Modern Anglophone African literature is still under foreign domination. So you have writers who believe that they have to be obscure. They have to use some Shakespearean style of. So you have that. So the coloniality is also, in addition to language, it's also embedded in the style and structure of most of African writings. Wide audience, this is how Kunene describes them. It is enlightening because it demonstrates how colonized African intellectuals focused and directed their writings to an audience or to a small African audience that had been schooled to reason and think in English. Members of this latter group, unable to recognize their own alienation and disorientation, often claim they can better express their ideas in English or French or Portuguese. In fact, one of them said, I am not writing for ordinary African man or woman. I'm writing for people sophisticated enough to understand the idea of these people. Instead of at some point when we had independence, we should have literary independence. The US in the United States writers at some point said we have to discard the structure and style of the mother country, the United Kingdom. We have to write as Americans now. So we are yet to have that because writers are still reproducing this idea of style structure that is from the metropolitan culture. So authors and artists in Africa are still scurrying for support to avail their works to the world. And this is what is happening. You have young writers trying to write, but then there is virtually no support. The state is not investing into art, so they are still scurrying for support. Sometimes when you publish within, it's difficult. So what some people do is to go out of the continent and produce their works from outside. When they are received very well outside, then that reception is extended down into on the continent. And this is what you normally see today. So, conclusion. African Anglophone literature is a vast area consisting of authors from different ethnic, national, and cultural backgrounds, united by the medium of English. The field is still battling with English both as a weapon and as a sign of defeat. As a weapon in such a way that they are domesticating it, they are adapting it, they are fashioning it to suit their own environment. But at the same time, it's a sign of defeat that they are yet to purely decolonize their arts. So they still write in a language, in a foreign alien language. And this has resulted to the death of many indigenous languages. Some are dying, some are dead already. Those that you see writings in them, they are just surviving, but you can't compare them with writings in English. It is seen it has seen significant works, plays, poetry, and the novel on diverse discussive fields. However, the novel seems to be the most successful of the three genres. I had my PhD in poetry, but I have to say that when you talk of African literature, I think about 60 to 70% of it, you are talking about the novel, and then poetry, and then drama. But this does not mean that there have not been successful playwrights. For example, Wole Soyinka got his Nobel for plays, not for his novels or his poetry. There's a large body of works by emerging writers, both on the continent and in diaspora, and this is something very positive. We have young writers, emerging writers, despite the difficulties, despite there are some of them are trying really hard to break out, to write, and some are even writing in their own native languages. There are many initiatives now in Nigeria, people writing languages. So these are the works I cited, and then muito obrigado. Thank you very much. Now, Goody, I now listen to your question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dikko Muhammad. It was nice to hear you. Lots of things to think about it. So thanks again for taking your time to be here with us from PUC São Paulo, from many people all over Brazil and Africa. I'm going to read a comment that someone posted here in the chat box. Someone wrote, between Soyinka and Bernat, the Egyptian writer Naguib Mahfouz received the Nobel Prize in 1988, and also some South African writers, Nadine Gordimer, J.M. Coetzee. So I think that was just a comment on other African writers who were awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. And now I have a question here that someone else posted, Dikko. The question is, one of the common theme of African literature is the clash between past and present. Can you clarify Achebe's point of view about this topic, the clash, between past and present?
Okay, thank you so much. I think for the information about the other laureates, thank you so much. Now, the clash you talk about is significant. I know there was this even debate in Nigeria about poets that are stuck in the past and those that are dragging us to the present. There are those that are saying that colonialism, for example, is a forgotten incident. So can we speak up today? Can we look at, can we kind of demarcate a line where we say, okay, from here, we stop talking about the colonial problem, we talk about just the present. But there are others who are saying that even the present is still influenced by the past. So I think I don't know, but I don't see clear demarcation in these two issues. The past is still connected in the present, and it still influences our futures. You can't think of the future that in some cases has already been devoured, by the past. I don't know. I hope I have answered the question. Maybe the person could give some examples if the question is not answered correctly.
Well, in the meantime, I'm gonna ask you another question that someone sent me here from the chat. Thank you for answering the first one. Also, if, as you say, there's a colonial problem with the idea of African literatures in European languages, I wonder why you accepted the categorization of African literatures along these European language lines. why did you not list African literature in several indigenous? I see it like the five in several indigenous languages, probably the those along Nguyen in Decolonizing the Mind. I guess there's a connection with his response, right? So feel free to answer.
Okay. Thank you, Chibu Asa, for this important reflection. One, I have to say that with many human concepts, if you press them too much, they reveal something different. And this is where I think constructionism is helpful sometimes. Human concept, none of them are stable, you know. So when I have to speak about African literature, you think of the large body of writing that we are talking about. So you need some concept to now kind of set some order. And this is where the concept of anglophone, francophone come in. And then, of course, the indigenous that you talked about, this is a good point. I try to emphasize it in my talk, that why is it that we are still defined from outside? Why is it that we don't just speak of Yoruba literature and Hausa literature and Kikuyu literature, for instance? You gave example of Ngugi, but I think Ngugi is the only person among the famous African writers who maintains his own language and writing in his own language only to be translated into English. The others, I don't think so. They have done that. Chibi hasn't done that in all his works. He was writing consistently in English. You think of, I mean, you look at Shoenkatu, you look at, so it is not easy to say that we speak of African literature, but we then ignore the idea of English and French. It's not easy. And even the French writings, coincidentally, we know many French writers. We know Sambene Ousmane, we know Maria Maba, we know a lot of them on the continent, but we know them because they have written in French and they have been translated into English. So I think we need to understand that the complexity of the language problem. You know, most of the times you want to run away from it, but then it has a way of taking us back. You know, so I think this is the issue. Sometimes we have to use this concept for mere description, but we have to emphasize on the African languages that are still that people write in them. So we call attention in a way to their existence, and so that proper study would be done in these languages. Yeah, and I think Ngugi did not start in Kikuyu, coincidentally. He started in English, only to go back. I think at some point, maybe someone needs to grow to some level before I can say, okay, I have reached a point where I can discard English and then use my own native language. So I think one has to be a bit strategic, you know, because in the end, if you are just writing in a language that is not read, I think one has to just find a way of managing it. I don't have all the answers. Thank you.
Yes, all right, Dikko. I have another question for you, like going along the same line, but now it's like my curiosity, my question here. While I was listening to you, I was thinking about, Ngugi Wa Thiong's Decolonizing the Mind, when he describes the shift from a harmonious school setting to the oppressive experiences Kenyans went through, such as not being able to speak their local language, and also some severe punishments, and the obligation to study the British colonial and canonical literature. So my question, like more of a curiosity, is within the different levels of education in Nigeria, you know, from elementary through high school or college, which kind of literature is covered nowadays in Nigeria? Like the focus is on Nigerian, Kenyan, maybe some of South African, or still the British is the focus as it was, you know, during this shift of colonization. So what's the most predominant literature over there?
Thank you, Ewerton. I think if you talk of research from master's to PhD, I think you see a lot of works, or 80% to 90% on indigenous authors. So some of them Nigerian, some of them Ghanaian, some of them just Africans from all over the place. But that, but the fact is, we still have courses where English authors are still studied, from Shakespeare to other prominent English authors. So we have that, but that is really minimal. That is not something significant, because you find out that in 10 courses, maybe just 2 for that. So I think critique, a lot has been done to decolonize. So just in this point, this problem.
Right. Thank you very much again for this one. I think Professor Cardoso would like to have a talk. Professora Becci.
So many questions, because this theme is very, very important. The language and the literature is very central. So congratulations for your speech. It's very important to us. Thank you very much, Dikko. The Nigerian literature is very read in Brazil. Many people like Nigerian literature. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for the honor. Thank you.
Temos mais perguntas,
Nathanaela, any more questions? Nathanaela, did you get more questions in the chat box?
Well, I don't have any questions. I would like just to congratulate Dikko for this wonderful lecture. That's it.
I think added the idea that said that he needs an example of any language, African language, that died because interest in them. The thing is this: a lot of what we now call systematic killing of African languages, and one of the ways is that you don't put it in writing, and any language that is not in writing in this modern age, on the extent. What is happening today is that you have who prefer that their children are taught English right from the beginning. This is how they are missing the projection is that in some few decades to come, there would be African English, meaning that they have forgotten or they don't know completely parents, and they would have no way of knowing them because they are not be able to learn them. And a lot of examples, even though they are already happening. You have inter-ethnic marriages where the fathers and then they raise the children in English. I have a neighbor all the time speak English. So from this people happen, the languages will die because nobody is speaking. So I think this is the idea. And unfortunately, our writers have contributed a lot in this direction. I don't be into Igbo, for instance. First, before any other languages, but he is translated, but not yet Igbo. If there, I am not aware of any into Igbo. And the same with Shuinka and many others. Really, we should be thinking of this as a problem.
Gostaria de fazer suas considerações.
Você falou comigo, Ewerton, para mim tá super picado o som, não te ouvi.
Agradecimento, das suas considerações finais.
Eu continuo não te ouvindo, mas acho que você pediu para eu fazer os agradecimentos, né? Vocês estão me ouvindo, né, Nath?
Sim, eu estou ouvindo direitinho.
Ótimo. No, I just want to thank you to thank Dr. Dikko for the speech. You give us a lot to think about. Thank you very much. And also thank you everyone who has followed us so far. É isso, Ewerton. Obrigada você também por ter organizado essa mesa para a gente. E obrigada a todos que acompanharam.
Eu agradeço também, professora. Obrigado. Thank you, Dr. Dikko Muhammad. We just can't thank you enough for your precious time this afternoon. And yeah, we have definitely learned a lot from you. I'm really hoping our roads will cross again soon. And thank you, Professor Elizabeth, Gianna, for your encouragement and partnership. And I also want to express my gratitude to Priscila, Nathanaela, Ademir, our awesome, incredible technical support team who were here helping us with the links and with everything. All the PUC students and scholars from all over the place who came to attend this webinar. So on behalf of the PUC São Paulo postgraduate program in literature and literary criticism, special thanks to all national and international participants. We hope to see you soon. And Dikko, if you want to say, if you want to say goodbye, if you want to make some final consideration, please.
Thank you, Ewerton, for all what you have gone through to see that this lecture. Thank you so very much. I wish you all the good wishes that you can wish. Thank you so much, Professor Elizabeth, for hosting us. Thank you for the incredible support you have provided. Thank you. I really learned a lot from the questions and the production. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm really
sent to you no later than a month. You guys will receive your certificate of participation in your email box. Okay? Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice evening to you. Ciao, ciao.